What up, guys? The Bench Buddies are back with our week two college football predictions. As always, I got my guy Ty here breaking down this week's games. But before we can get into it, we got to talk about last week and us not doing too hot to start the year with our locks of the week. Um, Alabama FSU under barely covers. LSU Clemson under another one that just barely covers. I guess you could say barely only 33 points, but it was just a big letdown for both those teams scoring wise. Utah was probably the biggest one we've had, and easiest one that we didn't have to stress about. Obviously, you had that one as well. And then the Notre Dame was right there, obviously possession away. Georgia Tech, Colorado, if they would have threw the Hail Mary and scored, we had that. I had that over. And then we're not even talking about the North Carolina game.
Yeah, all that stuff I said about Bill Belichick, apparently it doesn't transfer over to college because this looks like it's going to be a long year for the Tar Heels, and I don't even want to talk about my record prediction for them because that's going to be way off. Like you said, Notre Dame figured it out. They just figured it out a little too late and dropped that game. And then the Virginia Tech South Carolina game, I was surprised to see a defensive struggle. I thought uh, everyone that South Carolina lost on defense would kind of show and it turned into more of a shootout. So I was surprised at that. And then the Texas Ohio State game, not sure why he even threw it on there because it could have went either way. But it was, in my opinion, obviously I'm a little biased as a Michigan fan. Not a great football game to watch for a 1 versus 3 matchup. Not a lot of highlights to take away from that game. But yeah, back to the drawing board at 3-9. Yikes.
Yeah, and this week, hopefully, we can do a little better. I'm going kind of all over the board here, all different games. ISU versus Iowa, 3. I mean, I think I'm either going to push or they're going to cover at that point. Kansas, Missouri, I think that's just going to be a 30s game. I don't care. I don't know who's going to win, but I think it's going to be in the 30s. USF at Florida. Now, I get it's a different opponent and you're not at home here, but USF with their quarterback back, I forget his name. But regardless, he obviously sat out last year with an injury. USF was a very good football team in 2023 till he went down. He's back, and obviously we saw it against Boise how much he means to this team. So I think 17 points on the road at Florida. I think they can get that done. Boston College, Michigan State under. They both didn't look too good last week, but they still won. So I like the under there. Arizona State 6.5 at Mississippi State. Who knows what Mississippi State team we're going to get in their first big game of the year? And I think Arizona State and Rocco Beck, or no, sorry, Sam Levitt, I trust them more than a 2-10 Mississippi State team last year. Then Michigan 5.5 on the road at OU. This line opened at 1.5, and now it's crept all the way up to 5.5. I think this game gets decided by a field goal or less.
Yeah, I'm doubling up on 2 games this week. I got Illinois covering at Duke. Yes, that's going to be a tough road test early on for Illinois, but I think with all the experience coming back and a really solid defense, defense always travels very well. I think it'll be more the same for Illinois, and they get that done. I do like the under, though, for the reason I just said. Illinois with a good defense, Manny Diaz, defensive minded head coach. I don't see a ton of points coming out of that matchup, so I got Illinois and the under coming out of that one. I think Baylor covers at SMU. Baylor, while I wasn't quite as high on them as some other people out there, I don't foresee them starting 0-2. And I got to see SMU back it up before I can say they're as good as they were last year. I think they lost quite a bit coming off last season, and we got to find out if it was a bit of a fluke finishing the season 0-2 last year. And then Ole Miss -9.5. That's probably my lock of the week. Remember, Kentucky pulled a huge upset at Ole Miss last year. This is a brand new season, but I think Ole Miss has that game circled. They uh, had to remember that loss because that's really what kept them out of the playoff last year. So I think they come in with a vengeance this year and cover. And then I'm doubling up on my Michigan Wolverines. I think they cover the 5.5. I think the defense, while they struggled against New Mexico in week one, I trust Wink Martindale to get it done. However, I am going with the over because 45.5 seems pretty low for a very solid quarterback in John Mateer and also a Michigan offense that looked like they're much improved from where they were last year.
And before we get into this week's picks, we got to talk about last week. Our only game, obviously different, was that Texas Ohio State game. I was the victorious one in that one, meaning I went 7-5 last week. I mean, it's a okay week, I guess, for both of us. We didn't go under 500, and I think that's really all you can ask for in week one of any sport that you're picking. But I'll start it off here. I think I'll leave the door open here. Out of all these teams you see on the screen, I think what one was the most memorable performance that we'll take and kind of ride with the next few weeks?
I think it's the Alabama Florida State game, and I think this just shows how different college football is now with the NIL and the transfer portal and everything. It's crazy how teams can change from one season to the next. Obviously, Alabama wasn't exactly a national title team last year, but they were still very good. And now they just get absolutely dominated by a team who went 2-10 last season, and now all of a sudden Florida State's ranked in the top 15. So it just shows how much things can change. But yeah, I guess what game really struck you because there were a lot to pick from this week.
If we're gonna be honest, I'm gonna go that Saturday night probably nobody watched. I'm going Utah and UCLA. At UCLA, obviously their big news with Nico Imaliava, and his camp thought that, there's a better situation out there out west in UCLA, closer to home, all this. I mean, the only thing I think that's better than Tennessee at this point is maybe the quarterback room that he improved because he's there instead of what they had last year. But what Utah is doing, like you said, and you had him go in the playoff, and I might be on that hype train after week one. It might be a little bit of an overreaction, but Utah for me is the team that I think they're the favorites, I believe, right now to win the Big 12 after this week. Devin Dampier, played really well in this one. And Utah, if you go and look at their schedule here, they have Texas Tech at early in September, Arizona State early in October. Then after that, I could see them running the table at worst, going 10-2 and winning the Big 12. Um, but I guess another question for you here is that Texas Ohio State game, was it more of a great defensive battle or was it just the offenses just both struggled?
That's tough. I mean, obviously, Arch Manning struggled quite a bit. I do think he figured it out a little bit right at the end of the game. I think it's more about the defenses, though, because I think I wouldn't come away from that game saying Julian Sand played bad. I just think he wasn't really put in a position to do much because they didn't really need him to. So I think a lot of it falls on the defense, and I still think both of those teams will be very good. But yeah, I think. The Boise State South Florida game too. That's a lot to unpack there because we both had Boise State and they get absolutely ran off the field. So would you say South Florida's the new favorite out of the group of five?
I would say either them or Tulane. Obviously, Tulane beat Northwestern 23-3.
Yep.
Um, it was kind of roles reversed on who looked like a Big Ten team and who looked like an American team in that game. But if USF, like this week, if they can go into Florida and win that game, yeah, there's no doubt in my mind they're going to be that top team. His name's Byram Brown. That's the quarterback for USF. Last week, 16-24, 210 through the air, but it's what he did with his legs. 43 rushing yards, two touchdowns, and just really was a facilitator on the field. Boise State had no answer for that after halftime. But yeah, I'm kind of with you there with the USF bandwagon because if let's say they beat Florida, then that next week they go to Miami, and then after that it's a cakewalk. So I think if they can win either this week or Miami, they're definitely in the driver's seat moving forward for the rest of the year. But we'll jump into this week's game rather. It's going to be James Madison, Louisville, Friday night. It should be a good one. I think that there is a little bit of concern for Louisville because now that James Madison has seen some other teams win some big games, they are a group of five that wants to get that last playoff spot more than likely. So maybe there's a little added pressure here for James Madison against this Louisville team. Now I'm going to go with Louisville. Obviously, they have a lot coming over from last year, building into this year, and what they've already started with 1-0. I just don't see how they squander this opportunity early against one of the better group of five teams.
Yeah, I think it'll be a tough environment for James Madison. Now, they are another sleeper to potentially be that group of five team when it's all said and done, but I think they would absolutely have to win this game to really build their resume. Unfortunately, I just don't see it happening. I see a very solid season upcoming for Louisville, and I think that starts here with an underrated win.
Yeah, they're moving to Saturday. Obviously, you took them in the spread in Illinois, and I think Illinois can do it as well here on the road. It's a tough test though for Illinois. We're going to really see what this team is made of going into Duke. I know it's Duke. It's not a powerhouse ACC team, but going on the road this early against the Power Four team is never an easy challenge, especially with this hype around your team. But I like Illinois here to possibly cover as well.
I think it does help them that it's a noon game as well, makes it a little bit of an easier road environment. And obviously, having an experienced quarterback helps a ton when you're playing an early season road game. So I think Luke Altmaier will be a big difference maker here. And I think Illinois goes in there. I think they cover, and I think their defense will be the difference in this game, and they get it done.
And then also at 12, the game you're probably going to be watching, it's going to be this Iowa State game, the Cy-Hawk game. And, an interesting stat is the last 3 years, the road team has won this game. But I think it changes. I'm going to go with Iowa State at home. This team, I think it just dates back to going to Ireland and playing that week 0 game, winning that game. That's where you get all the kinks out. Last week, dominating performance against South Dakota, not South Dakota State, South Dakota. Good, decent football team there in the FCS, but I don't know, Iowa and their quarterback concerns. This guy was supposed to come in and change the program, and you didn't really get too much out of him last week, and I think that causes concerns for me this week, heading into this week. But I'm going to go Iowa State here to cover as well. But if Iowa wants to win this game, it's going to have to be in the trenches and they're going to have to develop a run game.
Yeah, I think the only way I could see Iowa winning this game is all of the chaos that's already gone on for Iowa State, having to go out to Ireland, get that huge win, come back home and host a top five FCS team. And now you're facing your arch rival here in week three. So no room for rest so far for Iowa State. But that being said, I think with Iowa going to Iowa State, I think that makes a huge difference. And the Cyclones get the win. I think Iowa, like you said, it's supposed to be a much improved offense this year with a much improved quarterback, but it feels like we've heard this before, and I really got to see it to believe it. So, Iowa State coming off what was actually a very impressive FCS win, because, like I said, South Dakota ranked right towards the top of the country in the FCS, and they were coming back from that long trip, but they took care of business, and I think they'll do it again on Saturday.
Yeah, the Mark Gronowski is the quarterback for Iowa. He threw for 44 yards last week against a really bad team. So that's kind of where I'm standing. And our
Right.
first disagreement of the week, I'm going Kevin Jennings and the SMU Mustangs at home. Now I can see why you're going with Baylor. They had a really good performance last week. They just couldn't stop that offense there with Hugh Freeze, and I can see why with Jackson Arnold. But SMU at home, I'm still riding high off of the last year's success. It's a tough challenge for them week 2, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt here. It is a home game, and I think that's what matters here in this one.
Well, Baylor's defense struggled quite a bit last week. There's no doubt about it. But this week, the good news is their offense will be able to keep up. I think this is going to be more of a shootout style game, and SMU's defense will struggle against this offense. And I think Baylor's just going to be a very desperate team on Saturday. You really don't want to start 0-2. Yes, they're both out of conference, but you need to get a win in your first two games. So I think Baylor will be kind of playing with their hair on fire, and they're coming off already having to face a really tough opponent. SMU was not really tested in week one. And like I said earlier when we were recapping the games, they finished the season 0-2 last year after going through a suspect schedule. So I got to see it to believe it with SMU as well in terms of living up to last year's success.
Yeah, then in this game, it's a great game. I think this could possibly be the best game of the day besides the Michigan-Oklahoma game. You got Kansas at 2-0, Missouri at 1-0. Both these teams, or one of these teams at least, is going to be ranked, I think, after this game, just because of the case that they're already building this early in the year. Now, Kansas and Jalen Daniels obviously have 2 wins under their belt, which is definitely a little more foundation to build on than this Missouri team, only obviously playing one game, but Bo Prabula obviously gets the nod here moving forward. Obviously, Missouri last week with Matt Zollers went down, and or sorry, not Matt. It was Sam Horn went down last week on his first snap. It was a QB battle, so he's probably done for a while. And Prabula, the transfer from Penn State, obviously he was a 5-star recruit to Penn State, but he's here at Missouri, and I think this Missouri team just keeps the train on rolling under Drankowitz and what we saw last year. So give me the Tigers at home.
I think this will be a very fun game to watch. Probably the best game leading up to the night slate. And I think Kansas can definitely keep it close. I think both of these teams could potentially be sleepers in their conferences by the end of the year. Maybe 9, 10 win teams. And this game will tell us a lot about who could be that team. But I think Missouri playing at home, renewing the rivalry. It's going to be a rowdy environment. I think the Tigers get it done with Bo Prabula under center.
Yeah, in a game I think that's going to be flying under the radar is this West Virginia Ohio game. Now, Rich Rod's here in West Virginia, so this team should be trending in the right direction by the end of the year, but it's early. And I like Ohio here. They hung on 31 on Rutgers on the road, almost won that game. And now West Virginia is going to Ohio. That's a new one. But Parker Navarro for Ohio is going to be the big storyline coming out of this game. Last week, 3 touchdowns, 250 yards through the air. And I think he kind of replicates that with another big game. And that's why Ohio's going to somehow, some way get some action rolling early here in week 2.
Yeah, how about a MAC road game here for a Big 12 foe in West Virginia? I'm glad my team stays far away from these, but I think it's going to be a tough test for West Virginia. Lost a lot last year and really starting from scratch here with Rich Rod coming back. So I think it's going to be a tough test to get to 2-0, but I think they do get out with the win. Just a little too much talent on their side. But yeah, going on the road against a mid-major, always a tough task. And it seems like everything to lose, not a lot to gain. But that being said, I think West Virginia does get out of there with a close win.
Yeah, and obviously we talked about this USF team already. Um, I don't think it's going to matter in this one. I think Florida is just the better team all around. Obviously, DJ Lagway is healthy. He went 15 of 18 last week in a blowout win, 3 touchdowns. He didn't really have to do too much, and he did way more than expected. Um, Going into the swamp is no tough task, or is a tough task. It's no easy game, and I think Florida pulls away late. I can see maybe someone betting the for USF to cover the first half, maybe be winning at halftime. But I think in the second half, I think Florida is just going to make better changes and pull away late.
Yeah, I think this game will tell us a lot about Florida. Obviously, they brought Billy Napier back with the way they finished last season, but they're going to have to make some improvements this year. He's going to be ran out of town. So I think this game will show us a lot for what's to come. I think South Carolina or South Florida coming off such a big win and then having to turn around and go to the swamp, that's about as tough of a task as you can get. So I think Florida maybe doesn't cover, but I think they pull away late and get out of here with a tough win.
Then the next game is probably a huge game for both these teams at this point in the season because realistically, these teams are probably fighting for 8-4 for their ceiling, and then this is a game that can get them in that direction. And I'm going Michigan State here at home. I know they didn't really have too much offense fireworks last week against Western Michigan at home, but Aiden Childs is still young. He's getting his feet wet. I know he's a junior, but this is going to be the year where I think he doesn't break out, but more people are going to know his name. Jonathan Smith is a great coach that is still getting his footing in the Big Ten. And this would be a good start to the year if they can pull out this win at home before they get into conference play.
Yeah, I tuned in. Obviously, Michigan State taking on my alma mater, Western Michigan, last week, and saw some good things out of this offense. They did not score in the second half, but the first 3 or 4 drives of the game looked pretty promising for that Spartan offense. I think Aiden Childs is going to be improved this year, and I don't expect a lot out of Boston College in the ACC this season. So I think Michigan State, very tough schedule ahead, but I do think they get out to a 2-0 start.
And a game that's just like that Boston College Michigan State game. I'm going Vandy here on the road. I'm riding with Pavia. Obviously, 3 touchdowns last week, almost 300 yards against a very bad FCS team. And Virginia Tech scares me last week. Now, don't get me wrong, they were probably 4 plays away from almost being the exact opposite score. Maybe it was in their favor of 24-10. But Kyron Drones is a big concern for me at this point in the year. I know it might be a little bit of an overreaction, but he was 15 for 35 last week with 2 interceptions. It's pretty bad in week 1 against the South Carolina team that, is a good team, but their defense isn't top tier like some of the other teams in the SEC. I think Vandy can make him throw the ball and stay in the pocket and not be as mobile. And I think that's the difference here in this one.
I do not see this being the prettiest game to watch. I know I said Kansas, Missouri is going to be a really fun game. I think this is going to be a close game, but it's going to be a lot like the Ireland game. A lot of ugly plays, a lot of mistakes, because both of these defenses are going to force the offenses into making those mistakes. I think that side of the ball is the strength for both of these teams. And like you said, Kyron Drones, as experienced as he is, getting off to that bad of a start definitely raises some eyebrows going into week two. But that being said, Virginia Tech has revenge on the mind. Lost at Vanderbilt last year when they had the high expectations. So I think this year they turn it around and beat them at home in what will be a close but maybe ugly football game.
And then a game that I don't think the Vegas knows what they're doing in this one. In my eyes, I'm going Arizona State to just blow the doors off this Mississippi State team. Now, don't get me wrong, Mississippi State last week, they had a okay performance. They turned it up in the second half against Southern Miss on the road, but they returned home a huge game early in the season to really find out what this team is going to be. But I just think Arizona State's clicking. Um, their last year's success is going to translate to this one. They got off to a slow start last week against Northern Arizona, only up 17-6 at half, put them away late. But Arizona State, it's like you said, I think it's either them or Utah that's going to be coming out of the Big 12, and they got to win this game if they're going to be that team because you can't have a slip up out of conference.
Yeah, you can't have a slip up, especially against what's probably going to be a bottom two or three team in the SEC. I do think Mississippi State is improved this year, but that's not saying a ton given they won only two games last year. It's a tough environment. The cowbells are going to be ringing in the ears of the Arizona State offense, but I don't think it's quite going to matter. I still think the Bulldogs have a year or two to go before they're really competitive. So even though Arizona State, like you said, got off to a slow start last week, I think the experience at quarterback and Sam Levitt, you have to roll with the Sun Devils here. And even if it ends up being a close game in the fourth, I like the experience of them to pull it off.
Yeah, and obviously the biggest game of the week, our Wolverines go on the road to Norman, face Oklahoma. And I don't think the storyline is the quarterbacks. I think it's the coaches. Brent Venables has to win this game. 'Cause if not, he might be fired by November if they're just tanking. Sharon Moore, obviously returning home, a Oklahoma alum. So this is a big game for him as well, leading his program in there. And obviously then we'll get to the players and what we think. It's going to be Bryce Underwood versus John Mateer. Obviously, those two are going to decide this game. And I'm going to lean Mateer in this one. But Justice Haynes, I think he can be the difference for that Michigan offense because if they can get the ground going, what we saw last week, almost 200 total yards and 3 touchdowns. If he has half of that performance, I think Michigan might be walking away with a victory.
Yeah, I agree. I think Michigan definitely has the better run game going into this game. Coming out of week one, I was more concerned about Michigan's defense than the offense, which I never really thought I would be thinking 1 week into the season. But if that's the case, I trust Wink Martindale to turn things around going into a big game like this, just like he did at the end of last season. So I think even though, like you said, John Mateer, a lot more experience than Bryce Underwood, I think all the other factors are benefiting Michigan here. So even going on the road, I just think the vibes are higher at Michigan. I think Brent Venables, his job is on the line. You know, he's been on the hot seat for over a season now. So I think Michigan, despite being a 5.5 point dog, they go in there and they win the game outright.
Then the last game of the week, UCLA UNLV. I'm going with UNLV at home because if you're just looking at stats, UCLA is 110th in every stat that matters on offense or worse. There's only 126 teams here in the FBS. So I know they played Utah. Obviously, like we said, Utah's gonna be a very good team, but it is what it is. And yeah, your counter argument could be, well, UCLA is down there too. Yeah, they are. But, or sorry, UNLV is down there too. Yeah, they are. But at least they've proven to me that they can score. Now, last week, they've scored 38 points in both of their games. So this team can figure out ways to score under Dan Mullen. And I think he's going to get a huge win to really boost their confidence and throw their hat in the ring to possibly be that group of five team that can get into the playoff.
Yeah, I went back and forth on this game, and really the deciding factor was the way UNLV's game with Idaho State went in week one. If they just took care of business there, I would have had no problem going with them. But as bad as UCLA's offense is, I think UNLV's defense is right there with them. So I think that's going to benefit Nico. I think he'll be able to get his feet under him this week like he really could never do last week. And I think UCLA goes in there and at least builds a little momentum for Big Ten play. This is an absolute must win for them. Coming off how bad last season went, you can't start 0-2 this year. So even though I expect big things for UNLV under Dan Mullen, I think they get off to a 2-1 start and lose this game at home.
That's going to be it for our week 2 predictions. Check back next week to see how we did. And obviously, we'll be breaking down all the big games next week. But thanks for tuning in to our weekly 12 pack of games. Until the next time, Bench Buddies are out.